What would you do if the person who gave you the life preserver was the one who pushed you into the abyss? This is the story of Amara, a single mother who lost everything after a storm and only has a pair of hands that can create miracles from the kitchen. And Julian, a billionaire who has the whole world in his hands but is about to lose the most precious thing, his son. $1 million contract has connected two worlds that never seem to intersect. He needs her fake family warmth. She needs his money to rebuild her life from the ashes. But they don't know that the terrible secret behind her downfall is about to be revealed. Will the warmth from the kitchen be enough to melt a frozen heart? Or will everything be burned once again by the truth? Join me in the story of Ashes and Ice right after this. The New Orleans air in September was as thick as a forgotten pot of gumbo. It was a viscous blend of damp earth after rain, wilted magnolias, and a bitter scent Amara had grown all too familiar with over the past 3 weeks, the smell of ash. She stood there on the cracked pavement of Dauphine Street, which had once been the heart and soul of her life. Before her was no longer the Spice Soul, the charming little restaurant with its blue door and vibrant bougainvillea pots. Instead, there was the blackened skeleton of a building, its bare beams pointing to the gray sky like accusing fingers. Hurricane Ida had come and gone like a greedy monster, devouring not only the roof and the oak tables, but the dream of 3 generations. A light breeze blew, carrying fine particles of soot that flew into Amara's eyes, making them sting. Or were they tears? She couldn't tell anymore. She had cried until she had no tears left. In that first week when the firefighters shook their heads and the insurance company announced that a damned little clause in the contract had voided her every claim. Now, the grief had settled, becoming a heavy numb stone in her chest. Memories flooded back uninvited, cruelly vivid. She saw herself a year ago dancing in the small but always laughter-filled kitchen. The sound of a jazz trumpet from the corner of the room mingled with the sizzle of shrimp and garlic butter. Her grandmother, the one who had passed down to her all the recipes and the love for cooking, was smiling gently as she watched her season the étouffée. "Cooking isn't just in the fingertips, my child," she used to say. "It has to start from here." She would place her warm, wrinkled hand on Amara's chest. From the heart. Her heart now was nothing but a barren piece of land. "Mommy, look." Lily's clear voice pulled Amara back to reality. Her 6-year-old daughter, with curly hair tied in 2 pigtails and wide eyes just like her great-grandmother's, was sitting on the pavement. With broken pieces of chalk, Lily was trying to recreate the Spice Soul. The blue door, the pink flower pots, and even a clumsy drawing of Amara in a chef's hat. Beside it, she drew herself and a tilted line of words, "The Spice Home." Amara knelt beside her daughter. She swallowed hard, trying to suppress a sob that threatened to rise in her throat. The child wasn't just drawing a restaurant, she was drawing their home. "It's beautiful, my angel," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "When are we going to rebuild the restaurant, Mommy?" Lily looked up, her clear eyes without a single cloud. "I miss your banana pudding." The innocent question was like a knife twisting in Amara's wound. "Soon, sweetie," she lied. "Mommy promises." That promise dissolved into the air, heavy and hopeless. That evening in the community kitchen of a church, where she volunteered in exchange for meals and a small corner for her and her daughter to sleep, Amara stood before a giant pot of gumbo. Around her were weary faces, shoulders slumped under the weight of life. They were also victims of the storm people who had lost everything. Amara picked up the wooden ladle. She had no lobster, no premium andouille sausage, only a few donated chicken pieces and some leftover vegetables. But as she began to stir the pot, her hands moved with an inherited grace and certainty. She closed her eyes not to pray, but to listen to the melody of the ingredients, to listen to her grandmother's whispers in her mind. She added a pinch of cayenne pepper to warm the cold souls, a little oregano for hope, and a large, unmeasured spoonful of love. The aroma of gumbo began to spread rich, warm, enveloping the cold space of the kitchen. It was more than the smell of food. It was the smell of sharing, the smell of memory, the smell of a home. As she served scoop after scoop of hot gumbo to the people in line, seeing the rare smiles bloom on their lips, the stone in Amara's chest seemed to lose a little of its weight. Her talent was still there, her heart was still there. But talent and a heart couldn't rebuild a wall, couldn't pay off the mounting debts. She was giving away warmth while she herself was freezing in the night of despair. More than 2,000 miles to the north, in a world built of glass, steel, and ruthlessness, Julian Croft felt nothing at all. He stood in his penthouse office on the 95th floor of a tower that bore his name. Manhattan spread out beneath him like a complex chessboard, and he was the player. Everything in the room exuded a cold, powerful aura: the polished ebony desk without a speck of dust, the expensive but soulless abstract paintings, and the giant glass wall overlooking an empire he had helped build with numbers and billion-dollar deals. "They've accepted," a voice from the speakerphone on his desk cut through the silence. "Final price $4.2 billion. All shares of Rexton Tech are yours, sir." Julian didn't smile. He just gave a slight nod, his ash-gray eyes showing no glimmer of joy. "Good. Begin the merger process immediately. Fire the entire old board of directors before lunch." His voice was like a sharp razor, cleanly slicing away any superfluous emotion. For him, this wasn't a victory. It was simply a predictable outcome, an equation that had been solved. The call ended. The silence returned heavier and emptier than before. He loosened his Armani silk tie. He had it all: money, power, the fear of his rivals, and the admiration of the financial world. But he felt a familiar emptiness gnawing at him from the inside. His personal phone buzzed. It was his lawyer, David. "Julian," David's voice sounded tired. "I just got the report from the custody evaluator. It's not looking good." Julian gripped the armrest of his chair. "I donated to the orphanage. I sponsored Leo's school library. I did everything they asked. It's not about the money, Julian. The court doesn't doubt your financial capacity. They doubt your capacity to be human." David hesitated. "The report states that Leo's living environment is cold, lacking familial warmth, and that you are emotionally distant. Catherine is using this against you. She says you can buy the boy the world, but you can't give him a home." A home. The word sounded alien in this room. Julian looked at the photo on his desk. Him and his son Leo on a ski trip in Aspen, both dressed in designer gear, smiling perfectly for the camera. But Julian remembered that right after the picture was taken, he had taken a business call, and Leo had gone back to quietly playing with his iPad. That evening, the scene repeated itself almost exactly. He and Leo sat opposite each other at a long dining table that could seat 20. Dinner prepared by a private chef was presented as perfectly as in a food magazine: pan-seared salmon, grilled asparagus, hollandaise sauce. But the space between father and son was vaster than the length of the table. "How was school, son?" Julian began, trying to follow the family therapist's suggestions. "It was fine," Leo replied, his eyes never leaving the iPad screen. He was only 7, but had already learned to build an invisible wall around himself. "Did you have fun?" Julian asked, the words feeling clumsy and artificial on his lips. Leo shrugged, a tiny gesture that held an ocean of indifference. Silence fell again. There was only the clinking of silver cutlery against porcelain plates. Julian looked at his son, a miniature version of himself with the same dark hair and gray eyes. He loved him in the only way he knew how. He provided him with the best of everything, secured his future, but he didn't know how to get past that wall. He could take over corporations, but he was powerless to connect with his own son, and that powerlessness was now threatening to take away his right to be a father. He needed a solution, a fast one, an efficient one. And like every other problem in his life, Julian believed that everything could be solved with a contract. The flight to New Orleans was an annoyance. Julian hated the humidity, the lack of order, and the loud music that seemed to seep from every street corner. He was here to finalize the last acquisition for a massive real estate project, a luxury hotel casino to be built right in the heart of the French Quarter. He had already bought up almost the entire block, with only a few stubborn small lots remaining. The lot where Amara's ruined restaurant stood was one of them. To him, they were just numbers on a zoning map, minor obstacles to be flattened. While waiting for the local legal team to finalize the paperwork, Julian reluctantly took a walk. He wore an expensive business suit completely out of place among the crowd in t-shirts and shorts. He was irritated by the organized chaos of the weekend market in Jackson Square. The smell of fried food, cheap perfume, and human sweat mingled, assaulting his senses, which were accustomed to the scent of leather and new paper. He was about to return to his air-conditioned car when an unexpected aroma cut through his sensory defenses. It wasn't like the other greasy smells. This scent was more complex. There was the smell of freshly baked, crusty French bread, the smell of fresh shrimp fried in butter and spices, the smell of a creamy sauce that was rich yet had the distinct spicy kick of Louisiana. It was a scent of authenticity, a scent with a soul. As if mesmerized, Julian followed the scent through the crowd to a small, simple stall. Behind the counter stood a woman with tired eyes that held an unquenchable fire. She was deftly making a shrimp po' boy sandwich. Beside her, a little girl was handing out napkins to customers with a bright smile. It was Amara and Lily. Julian didn't know why, but he got in line. When it was his turn, he said only one word, "One." Amara nodded, not really looking at him. She took the money and a few minutes later handed him the sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Julian took it feeling a bit foolish. Julian Croft, was standing in the middle of a noisy market eating street food. He took a bite, and then his world stopped. The crisp crust of the bread shattered, followed by the soft interior. The hot, juicy, perfectly seasoned shrimp exploded in his mouth. And finally, the remoulade sauce, a symphony of spicy, tangy, creamy, and sweet. It wasn't just delicious food. It was a time machine. In a dazzling moment, Julian was no longer in New Orleans. He was an 8-year-old boy sitting in a small, cozy kitchen in Queens. His mother, a woman with a kind smile he had almost forgotten, was making him lunch. The smell of toasted bread and fried food filled the house. There was laughter. There was warmth. This was before his father became obsessed with making money, before they moved to the cold apartment on the Upper East Side, before family dinners became performance reviews. That flavor was the taste of something he had lost a long, long time ago, the taste of a home. Julian exhaled sharply, as if he'd been punched in the gut. He looked back at the stall. He saw Amara laughing with her daughter, a genuine unforced smile, even though worry lines were etched on her forehead. He saw the way little Lily hugged her mother. He saw connection, warmth, all the things the custody evaluators report said he lacked. And then in the cold, calculating mind of Julian Croft, the pieces began to fit together, not with emotion, but with a ruthless logic. She had what he needed. No, not the food, but the image behind the food. The image of a family, of warmth, of a home. He needed a family to present to the court. She needed money to rebuild her life from the ashes. It was a perfect transaction. He walked up to the stall, his expression having returned to its customary coldness. "I need to speak with you," he said to Amara, his voice permitting no refusal. "About a proposal." Amara looked up, truly meeting the stranger's ash-gray eyes for the first time. She didn't know that his empire of ice was about to collide with her world of ashes, and neither of them would ever be the same. Julian Croft did not waste time. That very afternoon, he sent a woman in a power suit to Amara's stall with a business card and an offer to meet at the Roosevelt Hotel. Amara, her hands still dusted with flour and her heart full of suspicion, was about to refuse. But the name Croft Enterprises on the card, along with Lily's pleading eyes when she saw the magnificent fountain in the hotel lobby, made her change her mind. They met in a private suite with a panoramic view of the meandering Mississippi River. Julian, in an immaculate suit, sat behind a teak desk, looking more like a king granting an audience than someone in a casual meeting. He didn't beat around the bush. "Ms. Rodriguez," he began, his voice as cold as the glass of ice water on the table. "I've tasted your food. It evoked a feeling I need to recreate." Amara crossed her arms, feeling an invisible defensive wall rising around her. "I'm glad you liked the sandwich, Mr. Croft, but I don't sell feelings." Julian ignored her sarcasm. He pushed a thick folder across the table. "This is a contract. The terms are simple. You and your daughter will move to New York to live in my apartment for 6 months." Amara was stunned. She glanced at the folder as if it were a snake. New York. Why? "I am in a custody battle," Julian said flatly, without a hint of emotion. "The court believes I lack familial warmth. You, with your cooking talent and your image as a devoted mother, will help me create the perfect family image. You will be my private chef, organize family dinners, and create an environment the court wants to see." Amara's astonishment quickly turned to outrage. This proposal wasn't just insane, it was an insult. Who did he think she was, an extra he could hire to play the part of a happy family? "Are you kidding me?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "You want to rent me and my daughter as decorations for your life to deceive the court?" "I call it a strategic solution," Julian replied, unfazed, "and I pay very well." He flipped to the last page of the contract where a number was printed in bold. Amara glanced at it, her heart skipped a beat. The amount was enough for her to pay off all her debts, rebuild the Spice Soul, 3 times larger, and secure a worry-free future for Lily. It was an escape, a solid gold escape from the pit of despair she was trapped in. But the price was her self-respect. "My answer is no," Amara said, her voice firm. She stood up, taking Lily's hand. "My soul is not for sale, Mr. Croft, even if it has been burned to ashes." She walked out of the room, leaving Julian alone with the contract and the silence. For the first time in his career, Julian Croft had made an offer that couldn't be refused, and it had been refused. It annoyed him, but it also sparked an unwelcome curiosity about the woman who had just dared to defy his empire. Her boiling self-respect only kept Amara warm for one night. The next morning, cold reality hit her like a bucket of ice water. A pink letter was taped to the makeshift door of the church shelter, a final eviction notice. The landowner had sold the entire property to an investment group. Ironically, when she looked closely at the logo on the letter, she recognized it as a subsidiary of Croft Enterprises. The man's empire reached the very depths of her misery. That same day, she received a call from the bank. Her business loan was overdue. They would soon foreclose on her only remaining collateral, the land where the Spice Soul once stood. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She sat watching Lily sleep soundly on the creaky folding cot. The little girl's face was peaceful, completely unaware of the financial storm surrounding her mother. Amara looked at her own hands. These hands could create magical dishes, but they were powerless to protect her little girl. Her pride could nourish her soul, but it couldn't fill Lily's hungry stomach or give her a safe home. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She had fought. She had been strong. But some battles cannot be won with spirit alone. Sometimes one has to bow to cruel reality in order to stand up again another day. The next morning, with a heart as heavy as lead, she called the number on the business card. "I agree," she said, her voice hoarse, "but on one condition. This is not a performance. If you want a family, you have to learn to be a part of it. You have to actually participate. You have to be in the kitchen. You have to talk to your son without a script." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Julian's voice came with something different in it, perhaps surprise. "Fine, it's a deal." The flight to New York was like entering another dimension. From the clear, humid blue skies of Louisiana to a gray concrete jungle reaching for a hazy sky. Julian's penthouse was on top of the world, a ridiculously vast space with floor-to-ceiling glass walls showcasing a city that never sleeps. Everything was perfect, clean, and soulless. Designer furniture, expensive art pieces, voice-activated technology. It looked more like a showroom than a home. Lily timidly clung to her mother's leg, overwhelmed by the cold luxury. But the place that made Amara feel the most despair was the kitchen. It was as large as her entire old restaurant, equipped with the most advanced appliances she had only ever seen on television shows. Every surface was stainless steel and white marble, polished to a mirror shine. There wasn't a single grease stain, not one jar of homemade spice, not one well-worn wooden cutting board used with love. This kitchen had everything except a soul. Leo, Julian's son, was introduced to them. He was a reflection of his father, dark hair, wary gray eyes, and a defensive silence. He just nodded a greeting before quickly hiding behind his iPad, his own digital fortress. Amara felt a pang of sympathy for the boy. She could see the loneliness enveloping him, as thick as the fog outside the window. Amara felt like a saltwater fish thrown into a luxurious freshwater tank. She was drowning in opulence. The first perfect family dinner was a carefully orchestrated disaster. Julian requested a refined and healthy menu to impress. Amara, feeling lost and forced, cooked pan-seared cod with lemon sauce and steamed vegetables. The dish was beautifully presented, but it had no heart. It was the food of an employee, not a mother. The atmosphere at the dinner table was so tense you could cut it with a knife. Julian tried to make conversation with Leo, using questions he had prepared. "How is your science project coming along?" "It's fine." "Do you need any help from me?" "No, I don't." The conversation died. Lily, sensing the tension, silently poked at her piece of fish. Amara felt like an audience member watching a bad play. Just then the doorbell rang. The custody evaluator, a woman named Mrs. Davison, had arrived for an unannounced visit. Julian was startled, quickly putting on a fake smile. He introduced Amara as our chef and a friend of the family. Mrs. Davison had sharp eyes that saw through all pretense. She observed the silent meal, the way Julian sat with the posture of a CEO in a boardroom, the way Leo stared at his plate, the way Amara looked awkward and out of place. As she was leaving, she jotted something in her notebook. Julian glanced over and saw the words, "Carefully staged family atmosphere, lacking natural interaction." The moment the door closed, Julian's mask fell. "What a disaster," he hissed, his cold anger flaring. "I pay you to create warmth, not to cook a bland meal in silence." "Warmth is not a dish you can order, Mr. Croft," Amara retorted, her pent-up frustration finally exploding. "It doesn't come from expensive appliances or memorized questions. It comes from authenticity, something this house has absolutely none of." She turned and stormed into the kitchen, her heart pounding with anger and disappointment. This contract was a mistake, a costly mistake. She was selling her soul for a future, but she feared that in the end, she would be left with nothing at all. After the disastrous night, an icy silence descended upon the penthouse for 2 days. Julian avoided her, and Amara was consumed by regret and defiance. She could have given up, packed her bags, and returned to her ashes. But then she saw Leo sitting quietly in a corner, as lonely as a small island, and she knew she couldn't leave, not because of the contract, but because of the boy. On the 3rd night, she decided to change her strategy. She didn't consult Julian. When he walked into the kitchen for a bottle of water, he found she had set out 2 cutting boards and 2 knives. "Tonight we're making Creole beef daub," she announced, "and you will be my sous chef." Julian frowned. "I hired you to cook, not to give me orders." "My condition was that you participate," Amara reminded him, her voice firm. "And the foundation of any good meal, like any relationship, starts with the basics. Today you're going to learn how to chop an onion." Julian looked at the onion as if it were an explosive device. He reluctantly picked up the knife. Under Amara's guidance, he began to chop. His cuts were clumsy, uneven, and within seconds his eyes started to sting. "This blasted thing," he muttered, rubbing his eyes, which only made it worse. "Don't fight it," Amara said softly, her tone no longer challenging but instructive. She placed her hand over his, adjusting the angle of the knife. "You can't command an onion, Julian. You have to feel it. Feel the layers follow the grain. Cooking is a dialogue, not a monologue." Julian froze at the unexpected touch. The warmth from her hand seemed to seep through his expensive shirt. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about work or the custody hearing. He was focused only on the knife, the onion, and the warm hand guiding his. He chopped more slowly, more evenly. The tears still flowed, but this time he didn't feel annoyed. He felt something else, a release. They didn't talk much while cooking, but the silence this time was different. It wasn't empty, but filled with the rhythmic sound of chopping, the sizzle of meat in the pan. And soon a wonderful aroma began to fill the apartment. It wasn't the subtle, elegant scent of fine dining. It was a rich, hearty, authentic smell. The smell of sautéed onions, garlic, and celery. The smell of beef stewing gently in a tomato broth with Creole spices. It was the smell of a real kitchen, a kitchen that was alive. The aroma acted as an invisible invitation. Leo, who usually holed up in his room, peeked out his door. His eyes widened with curiosity. "What smells so good?" he asked Amara shyly. "It's beef stew, sweetie." Amara smiled a warm, natural smile. "Would you like to taste the sauce?" She scooped a small spoonful, blew on it to cool it, and offered it to Leo. He hesitantly tasted it, and then a small miracle happened. A bright smile lit up his usually sullen face. "It's delicious." Julian stood in the corner of the kitchen, silently witnessing it all. He saw his son voluntarily come out of his shell, for the first time, smile a genuine smile for the first time, all because of a pot of beef stew. He looked at Amara, who was chatting happily with Leo, and a small but deep crack appeared in the ice around his heart. Maybe she was right. Warmth couldn't be ordered. It had to be made. Their small progress was interrupted by the arrival of Catherine, Julian's ex-wife. Catherine was a beautiful, sharp, and perfect woman, from her hair down to her high heels. She wasn't a wicked villain, but something more complex. She truly loved Leo and believed that Julian's environment, with its obsession with work and lack of emotion, would harm the boy. She had come to pick up Leo for the weekend. When she saw Amara in the kitchen, she gave her a cold, appraising look. "Hello," she said, her tone politely formal. "I'm Catherine. You must be the new cook." The way she emphasized the word cook made Amara feel small and inferior. Catherine said nothing more, but her eyes said it all. "You're just hired help. Don't get any ideas about your place here." The brief confrontation reawakened Amara's insecurities. She was right. Who was she? Just a pawn in Julian's game. All her efforts to create a real home suddenly felt fake and ridiculous under Catherine's gaze. A few days later, Leo came home from school looking downcast. He had a class project: make a favorite family dish and share the story behind it. "Our family doesn't have a favorite dish," Leo mumbled, his voice full of disappointment. "Dad only eats salads. Mom is on a diet, and I usually eat takeout." Amara's heart ached. That evening she told Leo, "Then we'll create a new favorite dish." She decided to make beignets, the famous powdered sugar-dusted donuts from New Orleans. She told Leo stories about weekend mornings back home, when her whole family would make them together, the house filled with laughter and flying flour. They kneaded the dough, cut the squares, and fried them in hot oil together. Julian's modern kitchen quickly became a happy mess. Flour dotted Leo's nose and Amara's cheek. When the golden brown pastries were lifted out and dusted with a snow-white layer of powdered sugar, Leo couldn't wait. He took a bite and squealed with delight. Just then Julian came home. He stopped at the kitchen door, stunned by the scene before him. His son, whom he had never seen truly happy, was beaming, his face smudged with flour and sugar. Amara was looking at the boy with a fond expression. The kitchen, usually sterile and clean, was now filled with the smell of sweet pastries, laughter, and something he almost didn't recognize: joy. "Dad, you have to try one. This is our new family favorite dish." Leo ran over, offering him a beignet. Julian hesitantly took it. He took a bite. The sweetness melted on his tongue, and for the first time he wasn't just tasting the food, he was tasting the moment. He looked at Amara and Leo, and a strange warm feeling crept into his chest. He sat down and sprinkled more sugar on another beignet himself. It was the first moment of genuine connection between the three of them, a small but solid brick laid in the foundation of something real. Impressed by the change in Leo and Amara's ability to create connection, Julian began to see her in a new light. She wasn't just a cook, she had a hidden strength. One evening he found her sketching in a notebook. Curious, he asked and learned they were ideas for a new restaurant. She showed him her old business plan, the failed plan for the Spice Soul. Julian read it carefully. He, a master of business strategy, could have pointed out a dozen flaws, but he didn't. "You have an excellent product," he said, his tone serious. "Your flavor, your story, that's a strong brand. But your financial structure is weak. Your marketing plan is non-existent. You have the heart, but you need a business mind." Over the next few evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sit together at the kitchen table. Julian, the cold real estate tycoon, became her business mentor. He taught her how to create a balance sheet, how to analyze the market, how to build a scalable brand. In return, Amara taught him things that weren't in textbooks. She talked about the importance of treating employees like family, of creating a space that made customers feel welcome, of putting passion before profit. A mutual respect began to grow between these two people from completely different worlds. He respected her talent and her grit. She respected his intelligence and his sharpness. They were no longer just boss and employee. They had become reluctant partners, building not just a plan for the court hearing, but a plan for the future. 6 months passed quickly. The penthouse was no longer cold. It smelled of spices, echoed with children's laughter, and was filled with late-night conversations at the kitchen table. The relationship between Amara and Julian had grown beyond the confines of the contract. It had become close, complicated, and full of unsaid things. They had fallen into a routine. After the kids went to bed, they would often have tea together in the kitchen, talking about everything from Amara's business plan to the pressures of Julian's work. He had opened up, telling her about his lonely childhood and the pressure to inherit and grow his father's empire. She told him about her grandmother, about her simple dreams in New Orleans. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, their hands accidentally brushed as they both reached for a plate. A light spark passed between them. They looked at each other, and in that silent moment, the air in the kitchen seemed to stand still. Julian's eyes were no longer cold. They held a warmth, a longing he couldn't hide. Amara's heart hammered in her chest. She knew she was falling into a dangerous situation. She was starting to have feelings for the man who was supposed to be just her employer. She quickly pulled her hand back, breaking the moment, but the spark remained hanging between them, a promise as sweet as it was risky. The storm hit on a day that seemed perfectly ordinary. Julian had to leave on an unexpected business trip, and he asked Amara to retrieve a file from his home office. His office was like him, organized, efficient, and cold. While searching for the file, she accidentally knocked over another stack of papers on his desk. As she bent to pick them up, her eyes fell on a detailed zoning map. It was a map of the French Quarter in New Orleans. Her heart stopped for a beat. She looked closer. The project title was printed in bold at the top, The Croft Royale, New Orleans. A 3D model of a glitzy modern hotel casino complex sat squarely on the land where she had grown up. And then she saw it. A small red dot marked Lot 7B to be cleared. It was the exact location of the Spice Soul. Amara's world collapsed. The air was sucked out of her lungs. The man who had taught her how to rebuild her career, the man who had started to warm her heart, was the very person who had indirectly destroyed her life and her community. He hadn't just bought her land. He was planning to bulldoze the soul of her neighborhood. The warmth, the trust, the budding feelings. It all turned to the bitter taste of betrayal. She had been so naive. To him, everything was a transaction. She was just a piece in his larger plan, a means to an end. He hadn't rescued her from the ashes. He had simply moved her from one pile of ashes to another gilded cage. When Julian returned late that night, he found Amara waiting for him in the living room. The lights were off, only the city lights filtering through the window, illuminating her hard face and blazing eyes. "Congratulations," she said, her voice terrifyingly cold. She threw the New Orleans project file onto the table. "A truly perfect plan. You didn't just buy a fake family, you're buying the soul of my city too." Julian froze. He looked at the file, then at Amara. For the first time, she saw him look flustered, out of control. "Amara, let me explain." "Explain what?" She screamed, her rage and pain breaking free. "Explain that you came to me, a person who had lost everything, and made an offer when you were the root cause of the problem. You used my desperation to serve your own purposes. You don't build families, Julian. You just buy fake versions of them the same way you're trying to buy our culture and turn it into a flashy casino. It's just business." Julian tried to justify, reverting to his cold instincts. "Don't you talk to me about business?" Amara cut him off. "What you call business has caused families like mine to lose their homes, their history. You talk about building empires, but all you do is destroy." She ran into her room, quickly packing her and Lily's things into a suitcase. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of rage, not weakness. Julian followed her, his voice holding a panic she had never heard before. "Don't go, Amara. We can work this out." Amara turned, looking him straight in the eye. "There's nothing left to work out." She threw their contract down at his feet. "The contract is over. You can keep your money. I'd rather go back to my ashes than live in your gilded lie." She picked up a sleepy Lily in her arms and pulled the suitcase to the door. Leo stood in the hallway, his eyes wide with fear, not understanding what was happening. "Goodbye, Leo," Amara whispered, kissing his forehead. Then she opened the door and walked out without a backward glance. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Julian standing frozen in the vast penthouse. The dead silence had returned, colder, emptier than ever before. The warmth Amara had brought was gone, and Julian realized in that silence that he hadn't just lost a cook. He had lost the heart of the home he had only just begun to realize he had. After Amara left, the penthouse sank back into its familiar silence. But this time the silence was no longer the symbol of order and control that Julian once cherished. It had become a roaring emptiness, a tangible absence that mocked him from every corner. He walked into the kitchen. The stainless steel surfaces were cold beneath his touch. There was no longer the sweet smell of beignets, no sound of Lily's laughter, no warm voice of Amara explaining the difference between thyme and oregano. He opened the refrigerator. Inside were carefully labeled food containers, a habit Amara had established. His heart tightened. She had brought order to his life, but it was an order born of life of care, not his own sterile arrangement. On the floor near the dining table, he saw a pink piece of chalk that Lily had dropped. He bent down and picked it up, feeling its small, fragile form in his large hand. A tiny object, worthless in monetary terms, was now the most precious thing in this multi-million-dollar apartment. It was proof of the life that had once existed here, proof of a home that he had held in his hands and foolishly lost. Just then, Leo walked in, his eyes swollen from crying. He didn't look at his father, only at the empty kitchen. "Dad?" the boy asked, his voice small and broken. "When are Amara and Lily coming back?" That innocent question struck a heavier blow than any accusation. Julian couldn't answer, because he knew the answer depended entirely on him. He looked at his son, truly looked at him, for the first time in days. He saw the fear and loneliness in his eyes, an exact reflection of what he himself was feeling. He had started this journey to win custody of his son, but along the way he had nearly lost both of their souls. Julian returned to his office. The glossy proposal for the Croft Royale New Orleans project lay on his desk, the profit figures dancing before his eyes. Before he had only seen those numbers. But now he saw Amara's face as she talked about her grandmother's restaurant. He saw the people at the weekend market whose lives were tied to the land he planned to level. He saw Lily drawing on the pavement. His empire was built on one principle: maximize profit, eliminate all obstacles. Amara had been an obstacle. Her community had been an obstacle. But he now realized that what he had seen as obstacles were in fact the only things that mattered. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. "David," he said to his lawyer, "about tomorrow's hearing. There are going to be a few changes to our strategy." The courtroom was cold and solemn. Catherine sat at the opposing table, confident and composed. Julian's legal team had prepared a perfect defense with carefully staged photos of his family life, positive reports from Leo's school, and letters of recommendation from influential figures. When it was his turn to speak, Julian rose. His lawyer handed him a set of notes. Julian looked at them for a moment, then set them down on the table. He took a deep breath and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm but filled with an inner strength. "I have stood here many times trying to prove that I am a competent father. I have hired the best experts, presented the most convincing evidence. But today, I just want to tell the truth." A silence fell over the courtroom. Catherine frowned, looking confused. "The truth is, for the past 6 months, I have been engaged in a deception," Julian continued. "I hired a woman, Ms. Amara Rodriguez, to play a part in my family, to create a false image of warmth in order to impress this court." A murmur went through the room. His lawyer's face went pale. "My plan was a cold calculation, but I didn't calculate one thing. I didn't calculate that her authenticity would change me. She was hired to cook, but she taught me so much more. She taught me that a meal isn't just food, it's connection. She taught me through the simple act of chopping an onion that you cannot force things with power, but must have patience and understanding." Julian looked over at his son, who was sitting in the front row. "And most importantly, she showed my son something my money could never buy: unconditional love and complete presence. Thanks to her, I saw my son laugh, a real laugh, for the first time. I started this plan to keep my son, but the plan itself showed me that I never truly had him at all." He turned back to the judge. "I admit my failings. I have been a distant father, a man who put work above all else. I don't know if I can change completely, but I know that I want to try. Not by presenting false evidence, but through real actions. I will accept any ruling the court makes." He sat down. The room was utterly still. The judge looked at him for a long moment, his expression no longer stern, but deeply thoughtful. Julian didn't know what the outcome would be, but for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of peace. He had told the truth. He had chosen the right path, no matter how difficult it might be. Julian didn't wait for the court's verdict. Immediately after the hearing, he took the first flight to New Orleans. Words were meaningless without action. He didn't look for Amara. He knew his apology would be worthless if it was just empty words. Instead, he called for an emergency community meeting on the very land that had been cleared. The residents came, their faces filled with skepticism and anger. They thought he was there to make hollow promises. Standing before the crowd without a microphone or a podium, Julian announced, "The Croft Royale Hotel and Casino project has been canceled." A stunned silence fell over the crowd, followed by disbelieving murmurs. "I was wrong," Julian continued, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "I looked at this land and saw only profit. I didn't see the homes, the memories, and the dreams that once stood here. I cannot bring back what has been lost, but I can help rebuild the future." He held up a new blueprint. "Instead of a hotel, the Croft Foundation will finance the construction of a community culinary center right here, a place with professional-grade commercial kitchens for local chefs to rent at low cost, a farmer's market to support local growers, and a free culinary school for young talent. We will turn these ashes into a place that incubates new dreams." He was using his empire not to destroy, but to revive. He had turned a project of greed into a project of hope. Amara had heard about the meeting. She stood at the far edge of the crowd, hidden behind a souvenir stall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't the Julian Croft she knew. This man was talking about community, about healing, about hope. After the meeting ended and the crowd began to disperse in excited conversation, Julian saw her. He walked slowly toward her through the familiar market where they had first met. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a simple shirt. He looked tired, but his eyes were unusually bright. They stood facing each other, surrounded by the distant sound of jazz and the aroma of street food. "Amara," he began, his voice hoarse, "I know an apology isn't enough." "Then why are you doing all this?" she asked, her voice trembling as she tried to maintain her defenses. Julian looked directly into her eyes, his gray eyes no longer cold, but filled with a heart-wrenching sincerity. "Because you were right. I tried to build an empire of bricks and mortar, only to realize it was completely empty. The only thing of value, the only thing I want to build now." He hesitated, then held out his hand, palm open, a gesture of vulnerability, of trust. "I don't want to build a building. I want to build a home with you." The tears Amara had been holding back finally fell. They weren't tears of anger or pain, but of release. She looked at his hand, then into his eyes. She saw remorse. She saw change. And she saw a future she had never dared to dream of. She placed her hand in his. Their warmth met and mingled. Then, she whispered, a small smile gracing her lips, "We should start in the kitchen." 1 year later, the grand opening of Amara's new restaurant was a neighborhood-wide event. It was no longer called the Spice Soul, but the Hearth. It was larger, more modern, with a gleaming open kitchen, but it still retained the warmth and intimacy that had become her trademark. In the kitchen, Amara, in her familiar chef's hat, expertly directed her staff, but her head sous chef today was an unexpected character. Julian, wearing a flour-dusted apron, was clumsily, but with great effort, chopping vegetables, a skill at which he had dramatically improved. The court, having seen his genuine change and his actions for the community, had granted him joint custody. Leo and Lily, now like true siblings, ran around helping to deliver baskets of hot cornbread to the guests. Their laughter mingled with the lively jazz music and the buzz of conversation, creating a symphony of joy and life. Late that night, after the last guests had departed, the four of them sat together at a corner table in the kitchen. They were exhausted but happy, sharing a late dinner of leftovers. Not in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the skyline, but in a bustling, warm kitchen filled with the smell of food and love. Julian looked at Amara, who was laughing and talking with the two children. He took her hand under the table. He had once been the king of a cold empire, a man who had everything and yet had nothing. Now, he had found his true empire right here in this kitchen, in the embrace of the people he loved. He realized a simple but profound truth. A home is built with love, not bricks and mortar. And finally, he was home. And finally, from the ashes of loss and the cold of a lonely empire, a real home was built. Not with bricks and stones or contracts, but with sharing forgiveness and the taste of warm meals. The story of Amara and Julian reminds us that the biggest home is not where we live, but where the people we love are. And sometimes the hardest journey is the journey to find the way back to our hearts. If this story has touched you, don't hesitate to leave a like to spread this warmth. And please subscribe to the channel, press the notification bell to not miss the next emotional journeys with us. Thank you for listening, goodbye, and see you again.